So Steven Weinberg, a physicist who was extremely smart and won a Nobel Prize, is famous for ending a book with this sentence: "The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless." Now today I'm going to give you one of several reasons I think he's wrong. And it has to do with this theory of everything thing. So physicists are looking for a theory of everything. And if you're wondering what that would do, it would encompass all the fundamental forces in physics and reconcile quantum mechanics with gravity. Okay? And Weinberg himself got physics closer to that goal by showing how two of the four fundamental forces, the weak nuclear force and electromagnetism, could be unified under a single theoretical rubric. Well, that's more than I've ever done, and I can see why he won a Nobel Prize, and I can see why he felt qualified to express his opinion about the pointlessness of the universe. However, I don't think he was all that qualified, and I don't think any great physicist is all that qualified. At least they're not qualified just by virtue of being great physicists. And here's the reason. Even if physics does produce this theory of everything, it won't in fact be a theory of everything. It won't tell us anything at all about the most amazing thing, the most meaningful thing in all of reality. And that is the fact that it is like something to be alive. Stop right now and ask yourself, what's it like to be you at this moment? But don't tell me the answer, because I don't care about the answer. The point is just that there is an answer. Whether you feel happy or sad or hot or cold or enthralled by my brilliant exposition or annoyed by my arrogance, you definitely feel something. And this fact that there is subjective experience, pleasure, pain, love, hate, and so on, is something that physics shows no signs whatsoever of being able to explain. None. Zero. They don't have a clue. We are nowhere near solving the mystery of subjective experience, the mystery of consciousness. Why we have it, what it is, nothing. And by the way, it isn't really just physics I'm talking about. Physical science broadly cannot give us anything approaching a satisfactory explanation of consciousness. So, for example, evolutionary biology can explain why people and some other animals behave in loving ways or behave in hating ways. So, in other words, why they act altruistically and protectively towards some animals and act belligerently and violently toward others. That evolution can explain. What it can't explain is why you would have to feel love while you're behaving in a loving way, or feel hate while you're behaving in the opposite way. In fact, we can build robots that behave altruistically or behave violently, and we assume that it's not like anything to be them. We can imagine that being the case, right? It's not obvious why you would have to feel like anything to behave in any particular way, because our assumption is, the assumption of modern behavioral science is, that you can completely explain the behavior of human beings in physical terms, at least in principle. In other words, when I get my hand too close to a fire and then withdraw it, we assume that if we knew everything about the physical system that I am at that moment, we could trace the physical information that goes from the tip of my finger back to my brain and induces some reaction that physically compels my hand to withdraw from the fire. That is a fundamental governing assumption of modern behavioral science, and I assume it's true. I'm not doubting it. But if it is true, then why does this subjective experience thing have to exist at all? If you can explain all the behavior without reference to a subjective state, then it would seem to be the case that the subjective states have no causal role. They have no function. They're like shadows. They reflect the action but don't affect it. And if they have no function, then the question arises, well, why do they exist at all? Now, of course, we can correlate these physical brain states with experiential states, with states of consciousness. We can show that when you feel love, one part of your brain lights up, and when you feel hate, another part does. Fine. I don't deny that there's obviously some kind of very close connection between our biology and our subjective experience. What isn't clear is why the subjective experience would exist in the first place. I mean, intuitively, it seems clear. It feels like I feel the heat and decide to move my hand, or I feel the heat and the feeling of heat causes me to move my hand. But modern behavioral science, in keeping with the fundamentally physical paradigm that governs science generally, holds that those feelings aren't really involved in the action. Okay? So this science can't help us explain why they exist. Biologists can't explain it within this paradigm, and God knows physicists can't. Now, in my next micro lecture, I will say a little bit more about why science is unable, and I will argue almost inherently unable, to solve the mystery of consciousness. Meanwhile, I would just ask you to agree that if it weren't like anything to be alive, if we didn't have consciousness, if we didn't have subjective experience, if we couldn't feel love and hate and be overpowered by beauty and so on, life wouldn't have much meaning, right? Because we'd just be robots. Like, if you owned a robot and you were sure it wasn't like anything to be that robot, in other words, the robot didn't have subjective experience, you probably wouldn't feel super guilty about disassembling the robot and selling it off as spare parts or something, right? There wouldn't be anything immoral about that because there was nothing meaningful about being the robot in the first place. You haven't really destroyed anything precious the way you have if you walk up and kill a human being, right? So, subjective experience, we take it for granted, but the fact is that it's this amazing thing that gives our lives meaning. So if I'm right that physical science can't so far tell us anything at all about what consciousness is or why it exists, and that it may in fact never be able to tell us these things, then physical science can't explain the property of reality that gives life meaning, right? I mean, it's not like there's just this one little thing science can't explain so far. What science can't explain so far is the biggest thing in reality. It's the thing that creates meaning in this universe. And if that's true, maybe physicists should feel a little more humble and a little less qualified to declare that as the evidence accumulates, the universe seems more and more pointless.